Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing ghost stories from Florida. Let's get into it. Story 1. With a story like this, where exactly do I start? I have always held an interest in the paranormal, and this one evening in St. Augustine, I decided I would attempt to perform a paranormal investigation and get my toes wet, and see what it is all about. After all, what was the worst that could happen, right? Well, I went ahead and signed up and listened to the leader initially tell us about the tools that we would be using and explaining what type of activities other people have experienced, and was led inside the old jail and shown some photographs that people have caught on location, and was told some key phrases that others have noticed would bring out a reaction from the spirits. And armed with that knowledge, I went ahead and grabbed some equipment and went out into the old jail to see what was hiding in the shadows for me to locate. Now, I did have a spirit box, and I had been warned about the crawler, and decided that the first location I would go to check out would be the location of solitary confinement. Mostly because in the back of my mind, my thoughts are that if there was something holding a lot of energy in it, it should be down there, where people were held by themselves, and also that happened to be the location where the death row was, as prisoners waited to go to the gallows. Makes perfect sense that there would be some energy there, right? I definitely was in for a treat down there, to be perfectly honest. As I was recording and running my spirit box, I happened to notice that spirit orbs started to frequently fly by me, especially once the name of the sheriff that ran the jail was mentioned. However, to my disappointment, not much was coming through the spirit box, so maybe I wasn't asking the right questions. However, I did capture on camera the sounds of feet shuffling that I had heard with my own ears, and later on, when reviewing footage, heard a growl off to the side of the camera. To be fair, I never felt quite alone in this location, as I always felt like someone was watching me, or standing next to me. All that led down to one burning question in my mind as I left that location that night. What secrets are hiding in those walls, and what sort of evidence can I find if I return one day and reinvestigate? More updates to come. Story 2. Recently, I was asked by a friend if I had any ghost stories. I had forgotten about this experience and thought since it's close to Halloween, I would relay it here. About a decade ago, I was away with two friends for a girls' weekend at the beach. A family member owns a condo there and had kindly agreed to let us use it for a few days. One of the nights there, we were sitting in the living room drinking wine and talking about events from our childhood. We had been out early in the evening and were winding down the day after hitting the beach and a few bars. Myself and a girlfriend, Amy, decided to play a joke on my other friend, Susan. Off the main living room was a half bathroom. Susan was sitting in a chair with her back to the bathroom. One of us would get up to walk into the kitchen and would turn the water on in the bathroom, then sit back down. Yes, I admit it, we were terrible for doing this. Each time Susan would hear the water running, she would get up from her chair and question us about it. We denied knowing how the water had mysteriously gotten turned on. At one point I said out loud, "If there is a ghost in here, move that lamp." There was a floor lamp located next to the sofa in the living room. After a few times of us pulling this prank, Susan got up, got her shoes on, and was going to leave. We finally told her it was us messing with her. I felt horrible because she was clearly scared. After apologizing profusely to Susan, the three of us went into the kitchen to get some wine. The kitchen is fairly small, but has a cutout that allows you to look into the living room area. As I was apologizing to Susan, who had her back to the living room, I hugged her. As I faced the living room, something caught my eye. The lamp, I get chills just typing this, that I asked to be moved if there was a ghost in here, was now rocking back and forth by itself. Now the only one somewhat scared was me. I had received my just desserts. As we still had a few days left to our vacation, I did not mention it to either of my friends. I waited until we left and were traveling back to Tampa before I brought that up. I was clearly the one that noticed the lamp moving. Thankfully, Susan has long since forgiven me, but I will never mess around like that again. Lesson learned. Story 3. This encounter was told to me by my sister, Anna. She had a friend named Julie that confided in her that strange things were happening in her home. Julie and her husband had moved in 1 year before. They had 2 children, Miles, who was 5, and Sean, who just turned 1. Julie said that she and her husband were hearing noises at night. At first they ignored it, putting it off to the house being old, but then things quickly got worse. The noises happened more often, things flew off tables, and Miles began having night terrors. Julie wanted to get someone to come in and figure out what was going on, but the husband refused, didn't believe in things like that. Not knowing what to do, she waited it out. 2 weeks later, Julie was home alone. The kids were in bed, and her husband had to work until 1 a.m. Too scared to be alone, she asked my sister, Anna, to stay with her. My sister noticed that Julie was close to tears and asked her if she was all right. She shook her head no. She said Miles would sometimes stare at nothing, that he was too scared to go into the kitchen where most of the activity was, and he would stand outside Sean's room at night. When she asked Miles why he was standing in his baby brother's doorway, he said he was protecting Sean from the bad man. When she asked what bad man, he said the one who throws things. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She asked him, "Do you see the bad man?" He nodded his head and pointed at the corner in the hall. She went pale. I didn't know what to do, so I turned Miles around and put him back to bed. My sister asked Julie when that happened. She said last night. Both women heard noises for hours, and my sister's water bottle flew off the table twice. My sister said it gave her the creeps. It was 1:30 when Julie's husband came home. She went to check on the kids as my sister gathered her things to leave. Both my sister and Julie's husband heard a scream. Both of them ran to find Julie standing in the doorway to Sean's room. They all were looking at something that was hovering near the baby. It seemed to float back and forth in front of the crib. Then it looked at them and disappeared. Julie's husband quickly grabbed the baby, and the family left for the night. Julie's husband finally let someone in to find out what was going on. They were told that the poltergeist in the kitchen was someone who had died there at least 30 years ago. He was an old man that was named John. He was angry, and in life as well as death was not a nice man. They also said the woman they saw in the baby's room was protecting the baby from the other spirit. She was no danger to them. As to who she was, they could not say, just that she meant no harm. My sister asked about Miles seeing this man. They told them sometimes young children can see spirits. The family moved 3 months after that. Story 4. So I have posted a story here recently, and I had another more recent one come up into my thoughts. My family seems to be sensitive to the paranormal/spiritual. I cannot say that we all believe, but we have all had some kind of odd occurrence happen to us. The original super sensitive person was my grandmother. She had more stories than I could remember. I will be telling one particular story which happened sometime before she passed away. My closest cousin that I talked to every day was actually a witness to these events, as were a couple of other cousins to which I contact directly and have known my whole life. My grandmother was diagnosed with lupus, which runs in our family. This was around 2010, and the lupus was pretty advanced, because at the time, my grandmother was in another country and hadn't been able to get a clear answer of the disease she had. Once she came back to the U.S., it had advanced so far that she went into intense care and pretty intense medicine. This weakened her so much that she was bedridden for all of her last days. The family decided to keep her in the hospital for a few months, but once we saw she had no chance, we decided to care for her at home until the end. During her stay at the hospital is when the weird goings-on really got our attention, and they continued on into everybody's homes that she stayed in, as we all took turns caring for her. Those are some later stories. In the hospital, the nurses would be checking on my grandmother all night and day with various tests and administering various medicines. The problem was that she spoke no English, so my family members would take turns staying the nights with her when there was no translators around. The first to stay was my cousin D. He said the hospital looked creepy as it was at night. They would dim most of the hallway lights, and it would get very cold in there. And there was no space in the room, so you had to sit in a small waiting area outside of her room. From this particular sitting area, you had a clear view of my grandmother's room, and they would leave the door open so that we could keep watch on her in case she, as mentioned above, needed something and couldn't speak English. On this night, Dee said he felt uneasy because my grandmother kept moving as if she was in pain or uncomfortable, but when he'd go over to check on her, she was sound asleep. So he put it off as tossing and turning in her sleep. This sounded like a plausible explanation until she also started sitting up and talking at random, waking up as the night grew later. Dee would go over and ask if she was okay to check if she was actually awake and not having some kind of episodes. She clearly turned to look at him, wide awake, and said she was okay, but just talking to the lady that had been visiting more often than usual. Of course, my cousin Dee gets freaked out and tried to brush it off and helped her lay down and go back outside of the waiting area. To give a bit of perspective, the hallway was narrow, and it led to a single elevator that took you down to the lobby. They were on the 6th floor. The hallway was lined with the long 2x4 light fixtures. Dee said that around 1 to 2 a.m., random light fixtures would flicker on and off in a pattern and it randomly got ice cold. Dee was totally freaked out and just sat in shock. Dee said he looked over to see if he needed to get up to place a cover over Grandma because it was so cold. When he looked over, my grandma was sitting up in her bed and talking in a worried voice to a corner in the room, which you couldn't see from where he was sitting in the waiting area, since the door did not open all the way. He got some courage and stood up to see what was going on. Once he walked over, my grandma stopped talking, but looked very worried and was breathing pretty hard. He looked into the corner she was talking to, and it was empty. He turned back to my grandmother in disbelief and asked if she was okay, to see if she's actually awake and responding. As I said, we thought she was having little episodes of sleep talking and moving. She then grabs his hand and points to the corner behind him and tells him not to worry because she's gone, and she told her she can stay longer to say goodbye. Obviously, my cousin Dee takes his hand back and moves away from the corner of the room. Dee then asks my grandmother what she's talking about. My grandmother then said that a tall woman with pale skin and big black eyes that had no pupils, just all black, had appeared in front of her in the corner of the room. She said she had a long white dress and that would hang to the floor, but you could not see her feet. You don't know if she was floating. She also mentioned that she was holding a long spear-like item in one of her hands and a book in the other. My grandmother said the book looked like it was very old and it was only black, no letters or title. This being told my grandmother in Spanish that she was there to take her away and that it was her time. But she let my grandmother stay because she begged to say goodbye to everyone while they were all present. She had 10 children, including all their children. Dee then tells me he couldn't tell what my grandmother was saying, but after she explained what she did remember, he pieced together something she said, which roughly translates to, "Please don't take me, I'm not ready yet, please not yet." This was all he can piece together from the actual conversation my grandmother tried to explain. He only understood most of the Spanish, he could not speak or write it. Once Dee got her back down and sleeping, he sat down and called for another cousin Jay, to come join as he was too scared to be alone. As Jay and Dee stayed the rest of the night, the lights kept flickering and they kept getting cold gusts of air at random throughout the night. On that same night, they both saw her get up again to the same corner, point and say in an angry voice, "I told you to go away, I'm not coming yet." Since that moment, she never mentioned it again, and my cousins proceeded to tell our whole family this, who tried to deny it, although they experienced far worse growing up at my grandmother's house, which was insanely active with the paranormal. What confuses me is, isn't the Grim Reaper always described as a male with a skeletal face and limbs? This entity was a woman and looked very, very much alive. Story 5. I have some concerns, but to understand I should start at the beginning. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, my grandmother was messing around with a Ouija board around me. At one point there was a knock on the door, and when grandmother checked outside, nobody was there. I told her, "There's someone. It's a man, he wants you to let him in." My grandmother said no, quickly shutting and locking the door. The house suddenly felt like there was an earthquake. She took the Ouija board and burned it. I then started becoming sensitive to people's emotions and places to deep emotions. History. This happened in Dallas, Texas in 1994. Fast forward to age 9, I was taken in by my other grandparents. parents were divorced and not taking proper care of me and my younger sister. I was in my room, very upset as I didn't like the way everyone was treating me. A black mass in the shape of a dog of some sorts appeared. It told me it was my friend, my strength, and the only thing I had to do was let it be part of me. Well, kid me just assumed I had made an imaginary friend, so I agreed. I continually saw an unknown figure throughout the house. That was between 1998 and 2008 in Marietta, Georgia. Since then, I've had a strong connection with spirits and places, like I had become a magnet, but only one is really strong and has been attached to me. My exes and now husband have all claimed to see him in sort of a way. 2008 to 2009. First ex swore one time he saw a man of red hugging me and it caused my eyes to turn red themselves. 2009 to 2011. The second ex swore he saw the man of red several times in the house and he always seemed angry towards him. 2014, my now husband has dreamed of him, saying the man was standing outside of the house looking at him angrily. I never spoke of the man to any of them until they mentioned the encounters. There are times I don't quite feel like myself, like I'm in a trance or in a dream. I've been told I talk in a strange and different voice in my sleep. I had many strange and vivid dreams, especially after having my first child. The spirit doesn't seem interested in the children, but to my partners. Can anyone give me any advice or suggestions? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.